I used to think that investing was hard, boring, or complicated, but I found the perfect stock investing course that showed me how to invest as a complete newbie. Now I can build wealth in the stock market and do all the things that I enjoy at the same time. Check out the Lazy Investor Stock course and get started on your wealth building journey today.
What's going on, y'all? This is David W. Williams, also known as Diamond Dave. Glad y'all made it through. So, what we're going to talk about real quick is fake news, right? Plus low literacy will keep most people in poverty. And the reason why I want to talk about this is because I'm an advocate for literacy. I'm an advocate for people learning, but I'm also an advocate for making sure that the information that you're receiving is coming from a good and qualified source. So, let me give you an example of what I mean, right? One about, let's say maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, kind of right when they were starting this whole Doge thing, and they were going after US aid, right? USAID, so call it US aid, right? And I saw something on Twitter about the New York Times, right? Which is a publicly traded stock, which I wasn't even aware of until like this month, right? And the guy was saying that the New York Times was getting money from US aid. And he tried to make it seem like, well, the only reason why the New York Times has a paper is because they're getting money from USAID. So I was thinking this might be a potential short opportunity. They had just done their earnings. Their earnings came back really well. And so I reached out to somebody that I know is a journalist in real life, right? And what I mean is that they've gotten contracts to write for different publications over the course of their life. And I explained the story to them, and they said, well, link me to the person who put this story out there. And this is a person on Twitter. I linked them to the person on Twitter. And then they looked at the story, and in about 10 minutes, they was able to determine from their own research on their own end that this story was fake. They said once you actually get behind the scenes, you start to peel the onion back, you realize that this was a very, very small amount of money compared to what their yearly revenue is. And it was supposed to be disseminated over a certain amount of years. So it really had no real impact to the paper's revenue or their income or the bottom line because it was such a small amount of money distributed over a certain amount of years. However, the person on Twitter made it seem as if this is the only reason why the New York Times is on its feet is because they were getting money from the federal government. And this is why I want you to really understand is that we have a lot of people in these particular spaces that are presenting themselves as journalists, and they don't know the first thing about journalism. What I learned about journalism from this particular person who worked in journalism for, we say, almost around 30 years, is that you don't present a story unless you have multiple sources. We have a lot of people that put stories out and they have no source. Well, then you're just a gossip mag because you don't have a source in which you got the story from. You don't have sources that could corroborate the story. So you get 3 people to give you a similar story. It's just, here's what I believe, and I'm going to put it out there. Now, that's cool to do. That's what you call an opinion piece. But that's not a journalist. And you're not an independent journalist if you're not doing journalism. You're just an independent person doing an opinion piece. And we see a lot of that now, where there's a lot of people on the internet, they're giving you their opinion, but they're trying to frame it as if this is journalism. There is no journalism. It's just their opinion, right? But there's very little to no journalism because there's no sources. So when you go to journalism school, they teach you to get sources before you put it out there. Same way if you ever went to college and you got to write a paper, they tell you what are your sources for the information that you're presenting in a paper. And then you got to cite those sources in, you got to footnote them, and then you got to cite them in your paper. So you get like a reference page in college and you cite all your sources that you use to present your paper, right? You have people now that have platforms and you ask them, well, what is their source? Don't have one. Just came up with it, right? And then people are taking that information and they're thinking that they have some good information. And then when you kind of ask them, well, like, how does this work? Yada, yada, yada. They don't know because you're getting like third and fourth hand information from somebody that just kind of made this up in their house. And we're also going to talk about how this ties in. So I believe, and this is just my own opinion, that this proliferation of people want to just always watch videos and watch more videos and watch more videos. First, it is a characteristic of a low literacy level inside the United States. but it's also going to contribute to more and more low literacy. Because there was a time in this country where if you wanted to consume media, you could watch TV, but you also had to read. So if you weren't going to read, you could only just watch TV. There was no internet to really lean back on. Now we're in an environment to where the internet is so big, it's so large spread, to where YouTube now is television. And then you got social media that's just more videos. Because I remember as a media buyer, when Facebook started going more to videos, we really paid attention to that because videos gave us a lot of cheap exposure, right? Because if you remember, old school Facebook was just all print. When Facebook started pushing more video content, we really paid attention to that because videos gave us a lot of cheap exposure. What I'm saying is that what we had to pay to get exposure on Facebook was relatively inexpensive compared to what we were paying for print media. So what we did as media buyers, we sunk a lot of money in the video because we realized that we could get exposure to people via video that would not read. Because why? They have very low literacy rate. They're not a proficient reader. They're not enthusiastic about reading. So they won't read. Because when we first started off on Facebook, we were essentially doing sales copy on Facebook, where we was writing like 500 words to try to sell stuff. We realized I can just do a video sales letter. We call it VSL, throw that on Facebook, and not only bring in the people that read, but also bring in the people that can't read, but they still want to spend some money. And then we were able to get a lot more exposure at a much lower price point than we did just putting out essentially sales copy, right? And so we were able to tap into the people that can't really read that well. And so let me go ahead and get you some of those numbers real quick before we go ahead and get started, right? So here is a platform called Magna ABA Therapy, U.S. literacy statistics from 2024, okay? Literacy rate in the U.S. as 2024, based on their information, is going to be 79%, which is approximately 43 million Americans being categorized as illiterate. So based on their particular information, we got 43 million Americans categorized as illiterate. 54% demonstrate literacy skills below a 6th grade level, right? With 20% falling even below a 5th grade level, right? So you can be considered literate, but have low literacy, which means what? You're a grown person, literacy skills are at 6th grade or lower, some even lower than that on the 5th grade level, okay? 79% of adults can complete tasks requiring basic literacy. 21% struggle with fundamental reading abilities. This includes 26.5 million adults who score below level 1, suggesting that, hold on one second, my fault. Suggesting that substantial challenges in understanding simple text. 45 million individuals are functionally illiterate, reading below a 5th grade level. So that impedes their access to economic opportunities, overall life stability, right? 2/3 adults lacking proficiency in literacy are U.S. born, 34% born outside the United States. We have white and Hispanic adults represent 35 and 34% of low literacy skills, respectively. So poor literacy is frequently linked to economic disadvantage, poverty, low health outcomes, and they believe those costs are around 2.2 trillion annually for the U.S. economy. National Assessment of Education Progress, 43% of 4th graders scored at or above proficient in reading. 17% of Black students scored at or above. 21% of Latinos scored at or above by 4th grade, right? So 17% of Black students by 4th grade were proficient or above their particular level of reading. That's unfortunate. 21% of Latinos, okay? Unemployed Americans, 16 to 21, 50% cannot read well enough to be considered functionally illiterate, right? But they can be on social media though, okay? Low literacy results in less informed health decisions, higher medical expenses. 85% of juveniles in the court system are functionally illiterate. 43% of adults with low literacy skills live in poverty, okay? Then we got the breakdowns right here: economic cost, employment, healthcare costs, incarceration centers. So the majority of juveniles that are incarcerated have literacy issues, right? Poverty, 43% of people considered in poverty got literacy issues. Employment, 50% of people employed amongst young adults are functionally illiterate. Healthcare costs are higher because people make bad decisions because of the literacy issues. 2.2 trillion economic cost. And so what I want you to understand is that this idea where reading is not important is a falsehood. That's why I continue to keep hammering it over and 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 over again. And if you're going to be around me for a long period of time, eventually you're going to have to either like reading or you're just going to probably just stop deciding to be around me, because I'm very much a reader. I'm very passionate about reading. And I think that it gives you a benefit in society because you're dealing with a lot of people that can't read that well. So you automatically have an advantage over those people because they can't read well. And for a lot of people that can't read well, they can't think well. I don't come from people, especially a lot of the older people in my family, they don't have a lot of formalized education, but one thing they did do was read. They didn't have all the college degrees, and they have all of that, but they did know how to read. And I think that lack of reading really shows up in the way a lot of people make decisions, a lot of their comprehension skills, their ability to ask the right questions around stuff, because they haven't really figured out how to read properly. And then also, if they are they reading material that's challenging them, right? Because if you're a grown person and everything that you're reading is at a 4th grade or lower, right, that means you're not really being challenged by what you're putting in front of yourself. Okay, so that's what we're going to get with on the reading side, because we want to kind of show you how the reading goes into the economic piece from a poverty standpoint, right, and how it hits all these different areas. And we do have large amounts of the population. And here's something that you want to ask yourself. And I'm not going to do a video on this now, but I was thinking about maybe do a video on it later. As things become more complex from a technological standpoint, how do we think it impacts the percentage of our population that can't read that well, right? And so this is what you got to ask, because they start to roll out more automation, roll out things of that nature. What happens to that percentage of the population that can't? What is going to be their place in society if their reading skills are very, very challenged? What are they going to be able to do to be functional in the society, to be able to support themselves if their reading skills already are the 5th or 6th grade level and they're grown people, as things get more and more complex, right? So you got to kind of start asking yourself those questions, and then ask you, where do you fit into this particular part of the puzzle? Where are you at? Where do you think your reading skills at? Have you tested them? Do you know? Right? If you write and you write like a 5-page paragraph, where does that fall? Because you can put that into a program, and a program will kind of tell you what writing level that you're currently at. So these are kind of things that you want to ask yourself, right? But let's get into it before we get, I don't want to be too long. Where does your news come from? So we're talking about news. Where does your news come from? So that's a question to the audience, okay? If you get your news, where is it coming from, right? And this is one of the reasons why I do a lot of the stuff on this channel a certain way, because I want to understand, do the people that I'm talking to, are they comprehending? Because I'm against a lot of these models we have where the person sits back like it's television and they veg out to what's in front of them, right? Because that's what you do to like kids in pre-care or daycare. When you're too lazy to actually teach them, you just put them in front of the television and you just let them veg out on the TV. And a lot of people have grown accustomed to those type of relationships with media, as opposed to a media that says, hey, you need to interact, you need to get involved in what's going on. So that's why a lot of times on this channel, I ask the audience questions, and sometimes I won't move on until I get the question answered, because I'm not doing media where you just veg out to it, because we got enough of that, right? You can go watch the people pop the balloon. You can go get the latest gossip going on across the media right now. You can watch 2 dudes plus 50 or pushing 50, quote unquote, beefing with each other, and all you do is veg out, right? But there's no development from the media. So where does your news come from? Do you know? If you don't know, why are you consuming the media then? Right? If you don't know where your news comes from, why are you consuming the media? If you don't know where it comes from, right? So those are kind of questions you want to ask yourself. And again, we will find as people get lower on the literacy level, the questions they ask become smaller and smaller. They don't ask questions. They just, whatever you put in front of them, they just go for. So where does your news actually come from, right? Most people never ask themselves this question. Where does the news that you read or watch, where does it originate from? Where does it originate from? Do you know? So if you don't know, then why do you tell it to somebody else? Have you asked yourself that question? So if you don't know where the news, because I ask people, where does the news you come? Nobody answers. So then I'm assuming you don't know where the news that you watch comes from. So then if you don't know what the news that you watch comes from, why are you sharing it to somebody else? You don't know where it came from. I'm trying to figure out what's going on. So you don't know where the news that you watch comes from, but you share it to somebody else, but you don't know where it came from. So where does the news originate from? Where does the origin of the news that you're consuming on a day in, day out basis, regardless of whatever news you watch? Because really there's a commonality across all news. And I noticed because I used to run a news aggregator site and I had to figure out where the news was coming from. So there's a universality around all news in reality, right? But the news that you're consuming, regardless of where it's coming from, where is it originating from? What's the origin of the news? And then if you don't know, then why share it to somebody else? Okay, let's keep going. If you watch a reaction to a news report, is that news? So if you're on the internet and you just watch people that react to other news, is that news? Because people will say, I don't trust mainstream media. So what I do is I watch people that they react to other news and then they give commentary. Is that news? Because it's already been put out. So if I was going to say, hey, I'm just going to take stuff that go on CNN, or I'm going to take whatever goes on in the world and I'm just going to react to it and then give my little perspective, is that news? Because you got people now that say, well, I don't trust mainstream media. So I watch these other people on the internet, and then what they do is they take other news from other sites and they react to it and they give their feedback on it. And then I think I'm watching news. Is that news? Do you know what news actually is? So if we don't know what news is, news can be anything because we don't know what it is. So we'll call anything news, right? So this is why I want to really encourage you to read this particular book, Simulacra and Simulation. This is what the book looked like on Amazon. Read that, because many of you are now, because of the stage that we're at, you're looking at simulacra. You're not even looking at a simulation. You're looking at simulacra, and you think the simulacra is the real thing, and you don't even realize you're not even looking at a simulation. See, there was one stage of development in this country where we looked at a simulation of something that was real. Now you're looking at a simulacra of a simulation, but you still think it's the real thing. No, that's not what's going on. But because you haven't really examined it, you don't know the difference between the real thing and the simulation. So then you can't know the difference between the simulation and the simulacra, right? So that's what I want you to understand, is that many times, because things have been presented to us, we can't differentiate anymore between what's real and what is a simulation of what's real, right? So then what we're getting now is we're getting a simulacra, if that's the correct pronunciation, of a simulation, because we're so far down the road with this type of stuff, right? So that's why I told people that that Iron Man, I forgot which one it was, where the guy was supposedly this, like, international warlord, yada, yada, yada. And when Iron Man finally tracked the dude down and went to his house, Iron Man realized, man, it's just a television studio. This was never real. The whole thing was a simulation of what people thought a warlord should look like. It was just all on television. There was nothing real about it, right? So what's weird is that people will tell you that the earth is flat and we never landed on the moon, but they think news is somebody, right, in a studio, right, regurgitating what they got off a mainstream news platform. So they think that's real news, but then they also think the world is flat. We just live in a really interesting world. Okay. So these are the kind of things you got to ask yourself. It's not about what I say. It's about what conclusion you come to by asking yourself certain questions, right? What I say don't have nothing to do with it, right? So here's an example of what I want to talk to you about, right? Because this happened a long time ago. Because what we're seeing now is not anything new. It's been going on for years. Some of y'all gonna remember the Drudge Report, right? Here's the Drudge Report. So the Drudge Report launched, I would say, late 90s. If I'm correct, I might have got onto it late. And so what the Drudge is, just a news aggregator website, right? So you got these, he puts out like these headlines, right? Where's the beef? Bulk eggs now cost more than a tank of gas. Money flowing away from Wall Street, yada, yada, yada. This is the headline. I'm sorry, the main story of the Drudge Report. Rest in peace to Gene Hackman. I think as that story starts to unfold, we're going to realize what really took place there, unfortunately. So we want to say blessings to their family, right? Because I'm not Nancy Drew. I don't run that type of platform, but I just think there's more to that story than what we're being told. And we got to respect the family when these things happen first. So I know information going to be slow to come out about that, but big up to Gene Hackman, really good, accomplished actor. So here's a link on the Drudge Report, right? President eases rules on military raids and airstrikes expanding who can be targeted. If you go to that link, you can't see it. It's CBS News. Musk begs air traffic controllers to come back. That's a hyperlink. If you go to the hyperlink, if you hover above it, it's New York Post. Dodge dramatically raising risk to government shutdown. If you go over the hyperlink, it's MSN. So the Drudge Report was presented as, oh, this is independent news. All Drudge does is link back to other people's sites. There's no news here. He just links back to other people. So what he did was he built a news aggregator site where he posts his own headline, but it links back to mainstream news. But people will say, well, I don't trust the news. I just watch Drudge. Drudge made himself a millionaire off this business model, right? But this was before social media, all of that there. But he made himself a millionaire off this business model. And so Drudge did what we talk about in this Drudge did what is talked about in this particular book. Drudge was a simulacra of a journalist. He wasn't simulating a journalist. He was a simulacra of a simulation of a journalist. So Drudge at this particular time, when he was kind of at his height, he would walk around with this cap on and he would say press, and he would look like this stereotypical 1940s journalist. He was never a journalist any point in his life. He's not a writer, anything. He can't write. He just built the website and then he just linked to other people's stuff. But he was being presented as independent news. Nothing independent about him, because if those other people don't create the content, there's nothing for him to link to. So he's just aggregating everybody else's stuff. And then we got BuzzFeed and all that. They did what he did on a much higher level because they realized like people don't want to go all over the internet to search for news. They want to go to one place and get all their news at the same time. Okay. I think he was even out before Reddit. Like he's been around for a very, very long time. Okay. So this is like internet 2.0. He was running this. Okay. We see the site keeps updating. Most news comes from a handful of sources, and then it's disseminated out to thousands of printed online sources. That's how the news game works. There's only a handful of sources that are actually originating the news. Well, why? Because they can hire journalists. Most platforms can't hire anybody to go out and get stories for them. They don't have the budget. So there's only a handful of real news platforms, because why? How do you go get news? And so that's what a lot of people don't really kind of understand, is that there's only a certain amount of news originators where they have an editorial board. The editors send their reporters out, they go get stories and they bring them back and then they post them. Right? So this is why you'll see a story on MSNBC and you'll see a story on Fox News, but it'll be the same story. They'll just talk about it differently. But who do they get the story from? They got it from AP, or they got it from Reuters, or they got it from the BBC, or they got it from the New York Times, or they may have got it from the Journal, right? Or they may have got it from the Post, because there's only so many news publications, because there's only so many people that actually have journalists actually out, not writing reaction pieces. They actually put people out here in the field to get news. They actually send people out here to interview people around what's going on, getting sources, getting feedback, not just reacting to stuff, right? That's not the same as news. Being a journalist is not the same as I'm just reacting to what somebody else already did, right? Not taking away from any of the reaction channels, but that's not journalism. That's reacting to stuff. There's a difference between the two. Most of the news in the world today is coming from a very small handful of sources. And then it gets disseminated out to thousands of printed online sources. That's how this game works. So many times you think you're going to independent news. It's not really independent news, right? What it is just somebody else piggybacking off a story that somebody else, did the first time. Nothing wrong with that. It's a way to make money, but they're not journalists as a result, right? Secondary sources are republishers of news. So we got the original sources, then they republish the same news, and then what they do is they just put their own spin on it. So again, we got one story. So we got this press conference between President Trump and the Prime Minister of the UK. I forgot his last name, right? They did a press conference earlier today. MSNBC is going to report on that one way, and Fox News is going to report on another way. It's the same story, though. The story hasn't changed. So they'll both pull a story from the AP, but Fox News, for their audience, they're going to report on it one way because they got to put their slant on it, and MSNBC got to put their slant on it, right? But you don't really see Fox in a lot of places, and there's a hint I'm telling you is that people that remember this video go remember I told you this. There's going to be a new conservative channel that's going to come up over the next 2 to 3 years, right? It's going to bypass Fox, right? Remember I told you that? I'm going to give you more information on that later. There's going to be a new conservative channel that's going to bypass Fox in the years. Fox is on their way out of here for a lot of different reasons, right? Remember I told you that. Unless they can get the Secretary of Defense to come back in 4 years and run be the lead person for their channel, they're done. There's going to be a new channel that's going to come up, right? So there's very few journalists on Twitter. Most people are republishers of news. So Elon Musk is trying to sell Twitter as a place where you can get up to the minute news. The majority of people on Twitter are just republishers. They're not journalists. Are there some journalists on Twitter? Yeah, I follow the guy from the Journal. I follow that other person from, I think she's now with the New York Times. She used to be with the Financial Times. I did a video about her trading off of some of her information. The majority of people that are calling themselves journalists on Twitter, they're just republishers. They're republishing news that already came out. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So here's a guy on Twitter called Walter Bloomberg. He does a lot of financial news, right? Okay, Walter Bloomberg doesn't go out and get any of these stories on his own. He republishes what other people have done. So you got a story here, came out 7 hours ago, which was around this morning. China's Commerce Ministry charging fees on Chinese ships entering U.S. ports will disrupt global supply chains, backfire on U.S. economy, employment. That's the publication that he's referencing, which is rare because most of the time he doesn't reference anything. Here's a particular publication that he's talking about. So this is where this story came from. So this is not his story. He just publishes a lot of headlines. Often he references where it comes from. But the challenge is that if you don't go and read this story, you don't know what the story is actually about. You can't understand this whole story by just reading the headline. You got to go read the whole story. So here's the whole story. But he's built out a nice little Twitter revenue stream by just reposting a bunch of headlines on Twitter, right? Just all day he just reposts. And this is not a bot. This guy's actually doing this. It may be a bot now. But when I first started reading and following his stuff, he's not a bot. See? But this is not news. This is just repurposing somebody else's stuff. But this is what he does. So Elon Musk trying to sell me that Twitter's a place for up-to-date news. It's really not, because the news got to come out somewhere else for this guy to republish it. And you got a lot of platforms on Twitter that they do that. They just republish what somebody else wrote. Unusual Whales does the same thing with a bot. Unusual Whales just repost other people's stuff on Twitter with a bot, but they're not going out and getting any of the news. Only thing they may go get themselves is how the particular politicians trade. Everything else is being done by a bot. They've connected to a bunch of different news feeds, right? So that's what I want you to understand. Most people are just republishers of news. That's all they are. They just republishing. They're not doing anything else, okay? So we talk about this. Newsjacking started with the Drudge Report. The limitation of the Drudge Report is you have to read. Now people don't want to read, so what they do, they go on TikTok, they see what somebody got to say on TikTok. Then they go on YouTube and they see what somebody got to say on YouTube, but they never have to read, because why do we know they're challenged by reading? Well, we know what the low literacy and their literacy stats are inside the United States. So if you're pushing reading, Drudge can't do business with those people, because why? They don't read, because Drudge is still pushing you back towards written content. So the reason why a lot of these other platforms have surpassed Drudge, because Drudge's not going to do no videos. He had no interest in being in front of the camera. Right? So he stalled out He got to a certain level. He couldn't get past that level because why? When the market changed to doing video pretty much 95% of the time, he couldn't adjust to that. He couldn't do a hybrid mix. He just was going to do print because George had no desire to get in front of the camera. Limitation of George is you have to read. We're dealing with a large amount of our population that don't want to read, or they're not really, really good at reading. Okay? So news commentators are not journalists. They're not. I'm not a journalist, right? Somebody commentating on what already happened, that's not journalism. Journalism is something very, very specific, right? It's the ability to do very, very specific things. They're not journalists, right? Commentators are not journalists. They're not. But if I don't know what journalism really is, I think anything's journalism, right? But they're not journalists. So these people now that what we've created on all platforms where they're big commentators, which I said the Secretary of Defense, he's going to be a big commentator when he leaves that position in 4 years, right? That's not journalism, though. That's commentary, right? It's here's a situation and here's my perspective on the situation. And you're really not even coming there to really learn anything. You're just there because you like their feedback on something. You like what they say, yada, yada, yada. That's cool, but they're not journalists, right? So that's something that we have to learn how to discern between the two of commentary and journalism. They're not the same thing. But they're calling themselves independent journalists or independent news outlets. Well, you're not an independent news outlet if you're taking information from somebody else and you're repurposing it. There's nothing independent about that because it came from somebody else the first time. Right? So that's something that we got to really have the ability to tell the difference between the two. So again, man, read Simulacra in the Simulation. Really, really good book to kind of get you to understand what's going on in a particular world today. Okay, so here's something else I want to show you. Biggest websites in the United States, 2025. New York Times, CNN, Fox News, MSN, FinanceYahoo.com, USAtoday.com, People.com, right? New York Post, NewsGoogle.com, BBC, Forbes, AP News, Daily Mail, CBS News, Washington Post, NBC News, News Yahoo. These are the main news platforms. Don't let anybody fool you and tell you, well, you know, legacy media is dead. There's nobody on Twitter doing New York Times numbers, right? They don't exist. Nobody on Twitter is doing New York Times numbers. Nobody on Twitter is doing CNN or FoxNews.com numbers or MSN.com numbers or FinanceYahoo.com numbers. They're just not doing those kind of numbers, right? They may be doing good numbers for them, but there's a different level of numbers that they can be done. And New York Times not only still does digital, they still got like 300,000 print subscribers that still get their print publication. New York Times is a massive operation. Okay? They're massive. And they've stood the test of time. While all these other papers have fallen off, New York Times still got their paper. They've stood the test of time. Okay? So that's what I want you to understand. You're hearing a lot about this new media and yada, 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 but the numbers are still the numbers. Okay? And these people are selling subscriptions. They get money off, you know, you getting access, they paywall their content, and they still doing numbers. This is where the news is coming from. Okay, here's something else I want to show you. A lot of people are subscribing to what we used to call the AP feed, right? So what you can do now is you can go get access to AP, and AP will give you their stories and give you a license to utilize their content. And all you got to do is repurpose it, but you're supposed to credit AP when you do it. A lot of people are not doing that. So when I was coming up, we would call it the AP feed, right? RSS feeds have kind of gotten out of favor because of technology now, but AP will give you access to their content because they got reporters all over the world getting content. And then what you do now is you tap into their content. You can put your own headline on it. You can repurpose it. You can write it up, but you're supposed to credit them, right? Because used to be a time where people would say, this story came from AP or this story came from yada, yada. Nobody does that anymore. They just put their stuff out there. And you pay a fee and you get access to their content. Reuters does the same thing. So you can get access to Reuters and Reuters will drip you their stories. And then what you can do, because Reuters, people don't know, also got a financial piece to it, but Reuters would drip you their stories. So a lot of stories come from Reuters because why? They have the budget to put reporters in the field. They got relationships. They know people. They can get people on the phone. They can get access that the average independent journalists can't get. But what a lot of people are doing is they're taking Reuters content, they're repurposing it like it's their content. So that's the game that we got now. But so I want you to understand there's a difference between people repurposing content and actual news in the real world, right? So Joe Rogan interviewing a guest is not news. It's Joe Rogan interviewing a guest. Okay? If you're watching Joe Rogan interview a guest, that's not news. That's just Joe Rogan interviewing a guest. It's an interview. The actual news component to that could be slim to none. Then have you verified what that journalist is saying? Right? It don't matter who they are and what have, because here's the thing about how news used to work back in the day. The media platforms would be reluctant to let you on if you couldn't be verified. Now people can get on this internet and just say anything. And if it gets numbers and it gets views, it's a go. Who they actually are don't mean anything. That's just the world we live in now. So no disrespect to Joe Rogan, he doing his thing, right? But Joe Rogan's an ex-comedian, right? Who realized I can create this news interview style format and people will take it serious, and he ran with it. Big up to him. Because he was never going to make it as a comedian because he's not funny like that, like at all. He's really not funny at all. So big up to him, okay? But him interviewing a guest is not news. It's just Joe Rogan interviewing a guest. So I don't understand why somebody would take it as news. It's not news. It's just Joe Rogan interviewing a guest. That's it, right? Max Friedman, whatever that guy's name, when he interviews somebody, that's just Max interviewing a guest. It's not news. It's not. Right? It's not news. It's just him interviewing a guest. That's it. Right? So I wouldn't take it as news. If you don't know what if you don't know what journalism is, you will accept news from actors who get paid to read scripts, sorry for the typo, or carry stories from producers. Here's how news works, because I worked in news when I was a much younger person, right? I used to do television production. The producers write the script that they read. The job of the person in front of it, which is, I wouldn't even call a reporter, I would call them a talking head, is their job is to make it entertaining so you watch long enough to get to the commercial, right? With Joe Rogan, he needs you to watch long enough to justify, I don't know if there's YouTube commercials, because I don't really watch his YouTube page like that. And the same thing with Spotify. I don't even have a Spotify account, to be real with you, right? Because that's not really what I listen to. I do more Apple stuff, Apple podcasts. I don't really have a Spotify account, so I don't know how Spotify works. But his job is to be entertaining enough to get you to stay there. So either he can justify some type of advertising, or he can justify the numbers that Spotify's paying him by showing I can keep people on the platform. But it's not to give you news. Because many times what they do is they're getting stories from somebody else, and their job is to, in an entertaining way, give that story out to their audience. But they're not journalists by any stretch of the imaginations. And they're not really news reporters, right? It is what it is. Now, I know you want to believe, some of you want to believe that these people are just telling you the truth. I get it, so I'm not going to argue with you. But I've worked in news, and I know what it's like to come into the station and the producers are putting the script together for the day. I know what that looks like. Then they type the script up into a teleprompter, and the reporter or the anchor reads the teleprompter. I know what that looks like. I've been to production meetings where we sit in a production meeting and we sit down and talk about, here's the topics that we're going to cover today, and here's the angle we want you to take on the topic. Right? There's a dude used to play football for Nebraska. He now is an AD at some school. It might be Nebraska State. He might be the AD. And he talked about when he did media, he was told, your job is to be the heel on the show. The other guy's job is to be the baby face. So when these stories come out, your job is to be negative on every story. He just came right out and said, that was my job, was to be negative on every story. And the other guy's job was to be positive on every story, because that's what the producer told us to do to make this show work. It's a production, right? So they were doing news, but it really wasn't news for the sake of news. It was a production. The job is to be entertaining enough to keep people long enough there to run those ads. That's the goal, right? Because if you're so news heavy like NPR, nobody really likes NPR because why? There's not an entertainment aspect to it. I like NPR because I'm just weird like that. But most people don't like NPR because why? There's no entertainment aspect to NPR. I like it though, right? But I'm just weird like that. So that's why commentators can do big numbers, but NPR doesn't do those type of big numbers. And I hope they don't, hope the administration don't cut NPR. It'd be very, very unfortunate because NPR is a great platform, but it is to me because I just sometimes want the information. Just give me the info. We keep it pushing. I don't need all the rest of that stuff, right? So if the producer tells the actors what the story is, how is this journalism? So if there's a producer telling a particular, I don't know, you want to call it reporter, talking head, anchor, and is telling them, this is how we need you to communicate this out. How is this journalism? And so again, because we're in this space now where everything is visual and it has to have a different tone to it, and we're no longer into serious journalism to me anymore. Serious journalism pretty much is dead. Everything now is just how entertaining can it be, right? But if the producer's telling the person, this is what you got to say, and this is the angle that you got to come at, yada, 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 where's the journalism at in this particular situation? And these are the kind of questions you got to kind of ask yourself. So it is what it is. That's the environment that we're in. So that's pretty much going to be it. We're talking about fake news plus low literacy would keep most in poverty. We know that most people, I wouldn't say most people, let me rephrase myself. We know there's a large correlation. It's not the only contributing factor, but we do know that there's a very strong correlation between poverty and low literacy rates. We didn't say that low literacy causes poverty, but what we do know is that there is a strong correlation between poverty and low literacy, right? And so this is something that we want to try to avoid, and I would encourage you to avoid, to try to make sure that your reading level is as strong as possible. That's why anybody that comes into my course, I tell them, you need to read. And I also tell them, if you think you don't have time to read, break it down into the smallest amount it takes for you to read. I say read 30 minutes a day. If it takes 15 to 15, now you got your 30. If you got to do 5, you'll get your 30 out of the way. If you got to do 5 minutes of reading on your phone, because it's easy now because you got a phone, 5 minutes of reading on your phone, right? 5 minutes of reading on your phone, and you just keep doing that day after day after day after day after day. By the end of the year, you'll be way ahead of most people in our society because why? They're not going to read it all. They waiting for the next video to drop. They're not going to read, right? But when you start getting the higher level information, I'm telling you, it's still in print, right? I talk to people in the finance space all the time. It's still in print. These people not going to do no video for you. They're not, right? These big firms, they're not doing videos. Do some of them get on Bloomberg? And yes, some do. A lot of them not. They're going to put out what we call a report. These big banks put out reports. You got to be able to read to get the report. They're not doing videos for you. They still doing print in 2025. Because why? They know that their core audience, the people that's going to do business with them, they're higher income, they're also higher education, and they still read. So they have no desire to try to just do videos all day. They're not going to do that. Not taking away from people that do videos. I do videos all the time. But those type of platforms not going to do videos. So when I bring people into this particular space, I tell them, hey, man, you got to start reading. Because there's really, really good information that could be beneficial to you, but it's going to be in print. It's not going to be in video. So if you're waiting for a YouTuber to make a video about it, you're going to miss out. You'll find out way after it already taken place when Graham Stephan or Meet Kevin finally talk about it. The move was already over by the end. The move was over by the time they get to it. We want to get it from the banks to try to understand what we think the trend is before the move even takes place. Or how do the banks look at this particular type of stuff? But everything's not going to be video. And I kind of low-key think some of these people do too much video, right, in the finance space. But that's the world we live in with guys like Kramer, you know, because he's an entertainer, right? Kramer's not a journalist. He's an entertainer. His job is to be as entertaining as possible to get people to watch, right? That's why I like Bloomberg, because Bloomberg is set up like a radio show. It's not set up as much as like a TV show. Bloomberg set up more like radio where you got to listen, but not as much as you got to watch. And so that's why a lot of times I have Bloomberg up or sometimes Yahoo Finance because they're set up more like radio, but especially Bloomberg, as opposed to what Kramer does, which is 100% set up like a television show, right? Like some of the antics that he used to do 10, 15 years ago was crazy. You know what I'm saying? But it is what it is. Everybody got their own way of doing what they do. So I hope you got some value from it. I'm going to read these super chats. Ray Gun, man, appreciate the $2 super chat. Corporate checks, man, appreciate the $1.99 super chat. Miss Cherie says Kramer's a big entertainer, not much else. Yeah, I mean, he's an entertainer. But Miss Cherie, I was saying if people are mad about financial people on YouTube, how come they're not mad at Kramer? Kramer's been doing what he's been doing longer than anybody on YouTube. Meet Kevin Graham, Stephan, Jeremy out there in LA. Kramer's been doing what he's been doing before some of them dudes was even born. Right? So they're not mad at Kramer for making millions and millions of dollars being an entertainer talking about stocks. You can't be mad at Meet Kevin. They're doing the same thing. Meet Kevin just in a different lane. Right? But he is an entertainer. But he has to be entertaining because most retail people, they want to hear about individual stocks. They're not really there to learn about how the market actually functions. So yeah, Kramer's an entertainer. He's very successful as an entertainer, made himself very rich, done very well as an entertainer in the finance space, right? And he don't care what nobody say about him because why? People keep watching, right? He know how to get people to watch. And that's just to be very, over the top. Big up to Kramer. He done found his niche. Miss Alexander says, I need a certain CEO to not be on CNBC minutes before the earnings call, not be prepared. Yeah. I think the CEOs being one, Miss Alexander, I'm not a real fan of a lot of these CEOs being interviewed because I don't think they get challenging questions. But I know why, because no CEO wants to get on there and get grilled. So I think the platforms feel like if we ask them challenging stuff, especially CNBC, we won't get CEOs to come back because they don't want the headache. So they get them up there, especially Kramer, and they just throw them a lot of softballs, so it is what it is. But I wish they weren't on as much, but because you get some CEOs, they stay on CNBC. They always trying to pump their stock. In fact, I saw an old interview with Kramer and Vivek before he ran that pump and dump scheme. So Mr. Jayway, what's up with you? So I believe there is objective journalism, Mr. Jayway. I believe it comes from reading and not necessarily coming from news commentary. So I think there's been a blur to where people are invested in news commentary as opposed to just reading the news. So if I was just going to read the actual news headlines out of the journal and not the opinion pieces, because like the journal will give me news headlines and stories, and they also got the opinion pieces, right? So I think there's a difference, but I think people are invested now in news commentary, but especially opinion pieces. And there's nothing wrong with that. I do a lot of opinion content here, but I'm not a journalist by any stretch of the imagination. Like I'm not even close, right? And so I think a lot of people want the commentary because it gives a reaction as opposed to just getting the news, right? But that's just my opinion. So big up to you. Miss Alexander, I agree with you. If you do the work and focus on reading, you'll see trading opportunities in regular old stories. Definitely. I agree with you 100%. What's up with Erica Williams? NPR tells great stories, pieces from overseas. Yeah, they produce a really, really good show. So hopefully they can keep their funding with everything going on. So Roscoe, if you do the research, it can be verified. If you go do the research, right? Now the extent of him trading, I wouldn't know about that, but it can be verified. If somebody worked for an institutional bank, there's a way to verify that. Big up to Roscoe. So Lovely Ava says, I took journalism in high school and my teacher was very adamant about understanding integrity and responsibility. that was expected from this profession gone in those days. Yeah, I mean, there's just not a lot of journalists out there anymore because journalism really don't pay anymore. It doesn't pay. That's why everybody ran onto the internet. It don't really pay, right? When the papers got rid of a lot of people, like in the 90s and the 2000s, that was the end of journalism. It just took time. Now, like I say, you still got the New York Times, the Journal, the Post, even though I think the Post is on its way out too. You got it, Erica. That's exactly the one it's going to be. There's a lot more coming too later this year. You know, I'm gonna put out a PDF based around it, try to sell it. But yeah, you got it. You on top of it though. Most people gonna figure that out later, Erica. Like probably 2026, they'll probably figure it out. Yeah, I agree with you. Erica says most folks get overwhelmed because of making things 45 seconds and 3 minutes bit size. Yeah, I agree with you. It's unfortunate though, but yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, I remember years ago, I was in production school. We were talking about the MTV cut, how they was cutting like every 3 seconds. And the instructor telling us it's gonna kill movies. Because as once people get used to that, you can't establish anything because they used to a cut every 3 seconds. And you see, if you watch an older movie, and I'm not just talking to you, I'm talking to the audience. If you watch a movie that came out like early 2000s and before, they hold the shot way longer than movies that are out now. If things are cut. That's all people can watch. They can't sit on no shot. Even with TV shows, they can't sit on the shot anymore. That shot got to be moving, else they're gonna get distracted. Appreciate it, Miss Brandon Williams. Hit Brandon Williams up for your taxes. Y'all know it's tax time. Y'all trying to get y'all refund back. You know, you got to do what you got to do. Pascal, man, appreciate the $1.99. Appreciate the $4.99. Christian Amerson, appreciate the $4.99. Do I think Cramer is paid to mislead on purpose? Yeah, I think you're a little too deep down the rabbit hole. I think Cramer's getting paid to entertain people. Right? I think he's paid to entertain. I don't think it's no grand conspiracy behind that. He's an entertainer. That's what he get paid to do. Yeah, they are. And it get deeper than that, Erica. So I'm gonna put it out there. It get deeper than that. I'm gonna put out something called the Trump trade around what you should trade based on Trump being in office. It get deeper than that. But yeah, I believe that. They was also at I forgot the meeting they had yesterday with, what is it called? I forgot what it was called. But the meeting that Trump had yesterday with his staff, I think it was a cabinet meeting. They was there too. Yeah, there's a reason for that, Erica. Right, there's a reason for that. So I'm gonna put out something called the Trump trade. I got to go ahead and put everything together. But yeah, I think a lot of people really need to start looking at Newsmax a different way. They will though, because he got 4 years. So by the end of this 4 years, they will. Just gonna take time because Fox been around forever. So it's gonna take a minute. I wonder what they're gonna do though when they kind of lose a spot. Everybody at Fox Business is running around selling courses. Yeah, I know that black dude. He sell a lot of stuff. I ain't mad at him. He got to get some money. Partnerships, full speaking events the rest of the year. Yeah, but what may save them is when Petey come back, because he only going to do 4 years. When Petey come back, Petey probably going to get the bag because he probably going to be put in position to try to save the network. Now, all of this is my opinion. It's just my perspective. None of this is information that somebody told me. But I think Petey gonna do 4 years because this ain't nothing but a cash grab for Petey. And Petey gonna go back to Fox, and Fox gonna probably pay him double-digit millions. He's already making $8 million a year over there. They're going to pay him double-digit millions. I'm talking about like north of 15 to try to get their network back. They ain't going to have no choice unless they're going to bring Tucker Carlson back. So that's what's going to happen. That's how I see it playing out. So this is a great situation for Petey to raise his profile and then to go back to television, because Petey is a TV guy, right? How he got to become SOD is whatever, right? But it is what is a great opportunity for him to make him some money when he get out in 4 years. And he's still not going to be 50 years old. Yeah, I'm going to put it on, I might put it on Gumroad. So I might put out a Gumroad. It'll just be a PDF. It'll be something basic, but I'll probably put it on Gumroad. I'm trying to get more into putting out products, like the brother on Fox that's dropping a whole bunch of products. I see his ads on YouTube all the time. And I never saw him sell nothing until like around 2021. And then that brother started selling options courses and stock courses, everything. He trying to get him some money. I ain't mad at him. Do I think cable news will die for the next decade or so? I'm not sure. I mean, to be real with you, J. I don't watch TV, right? So I don't watch TV, bro. So I wouldn't know, because I don't watch TV, right? So I think you may get another iteration of what they're doing, because now with the internet, you get your YouTube channel, they can do the same thing they're doing on YouTube, right? So is that still cable news, or are you just talking about the platform or the content, right? So I think the content will always have a place. The platform could change, right? But to me, it's already been there. Like I said, I don't watch TV, right? I only own a TV. I own monitors, but I don't own the TV. I ain't own the TV in years. I haven't had cable in years either, right? So to me, the platform may not be valuable, but I think the content will always be valuable if it's entertaining enough, you know? And so I think, because I think the literacy level is going to get lower and lower and lower and lower and lower. And people are going to desire more and more entertainment. That's never going to stop. People like to be entertained. So if the content is entertaining, go for it, right? But great question, though. Yeah, he's not as big as he was when he was on Fox, though. You know, so it is what it is. Fox was the height of his career. He's not doing those same type of numbers. So that's going to be it, man. We're going to get up on out. I appreciate everybody for coming through. So I want to really encourage you, man. Read Simulacra and the Simulacra. Read that book. You can get it off Amazon. It's not even expensive. It's been around forever, right? Really, really good book. And then when you're looking at stuff, ask yourself, is this a simulation? Or is this a simulacra of the simulation? Because that's a lot of what's going on out here. And people thinking this is the real thing. It's the farthest thing from the real thing, right? So it's a really, really good book. There's only one other person I even seen on YouTube even suggest this book. I don't like to say I was first, because somebody was always before me. But there's only one other person on YouTube I even seen talk about this book. Most people don't even know it even exists. But it's a really, really good book. And I wouldn't read it one time. I would read it multiple times, because it's not light material, right? So we're going to get up on out of here. Y'all stay safe. Talk to y'all later.